G2 and are your spring split champions.
3 rookies prove themselves worthy of the top 4 in the EU LCS.
A double kill from Perks! This guy is a madman! He can do it! Oh, Memento! You beautiful man!
Guess the Quadra gonna be a pacer for Kobe!
It's time to find out who will rise. This is the EU LCS. Welcome to Berlin for some banter and some hard-hitting analysis. In today's Ready Check, G2 and Misfits, they're our top teams, but we will talk about, or ask the question rather, who are our dark horses in the EU LCS? Well, we'll find out in just a bit, but first, I'm Eva Sjokz supporter, kicking off the day with Christy and their Frierson and Daniel Drakos.
We're going to get that in there.
Yeah.
I love when that comes in, the double
Don't call me
Drakos.
Dracos.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that meme.
I mean, it's
not even my meme. People just like apply that to me. Rest in peace, Joe Miller, Joe. Yeah, don't call me Joe Miller.
Well, it's also the first time I get to introduce you on anything, so it's really cool.
Yeah, it's weird not being on the hosting side. I'm a much more intimate contact distance here with Ender, so we're going to have a wonderful personal relationship.
I'm like a host sandwich right now.
Okay, I can do that as well. By the way. I'm not confined to my own place. Anyway, enough about our physical contact and our preferences. Let's talk about League of Legends, because yesterday we asked everyone who is the best team in Europe, and while G2 and Misfits, they answered us on the Rift. They are still undefeated, and to be honest, they looked very, very dominating in their respective games.
I mean, they've got that safe 2-game buffer over Fnatic. They both absolutely dumpstered the competition yesterday, and playing different styles, but still both looking just as dominant.
And I think especially that G2 win is one we should talk about a little bit, since it was the match of the week and it was versus Fnatic, and they played their funnel comp again and won again.
And it looks so good, right? Seeing the Xayah come out for Perks across the board, G2 seems to be the only team in Europe right now that can consistently execute the funnel comp, and also the only team that doesn't put themselves in deficits trying it out. So it's a really good look for G2, and definitely making a case for #1 in Europe.
5-0, maybe on the way to 6-0. Is it too early to talk about G2, the kings of Europe, or the champions for this split, or should we stay away from that for now?
I mean, right now they're the top 2 in Europe, so they have to be in that conversation, but I don't think you can count out Misfits, because they have looked consistently to be, in my eyes, the best team in Europe.
Misfits is looking very good, and G2 still some question marks. This composition is obviously very much facilitated by the meta. When the meta changes, are G2 going to be as good? Are we going to see those same weaknesses we saw in spring? Those questions just aren't answered yet. So for right now, Misfits looking like the safer bet.
Well, safer bet also because they play in a safe way that should be an evergreen even if the meta changes, because they are playing standard, and they are playing standard fantastically. Maxlor is enabling all those lanes, and they just look the cleanest maybe out of all the teams we've seen with G2.
Exactly. It's been about the 80 carries in the bottom lane for Hansama, Maxlor's early game presence as well. It's all been fantastic stuff out of them. And while G2, Perks has said that they have other tricks up their sleeve, that hasn't been proven to us, whereas for Misfits, it's all looking good.
And after Rift Rivals, Misfits will be taking on G2 Esports in our match of the week on the 13th, that's hard to say, of July. So I'm really excited to see if the Rift Rivals, if G2 will have changed some of their style, if they will have shown us some new things, if Misfits maybe are flexing and have something prepared for the meta after that. If anything, we're gonna know a lot more about the state of the league.
There's gonna be change, right? It'll be on patch 8.13, as I think you mentioned, and I mean, we've got fun stuff. We got new Aatrox.
I'm excited. Less about new Aatrox, but definitely having a clear #1 in the league is really exciting for me always, because I feel like in Europe we almost always have that #1 team and everyone else is chasing them. And for the first time in a long time in this split, I think that's really not the case yet. But getting to that point is always so interesting for me.
That's true. We're getting more answers to all of our questions as the games go on. And yesterday a lot went down. So Drakos, tell us what we learned from day one.
All right. Well, the first thing that we learned, my personal favorite lesson of the day, is that G2 are going to funnel anything. Literally anything they can get their hands on. First it was Kai'Sa, then it was Lucian, and now the Xayah as well. They are so good at running these funnel comps. I mentioned it already, but the whole team is ready to execute, ready to play around Perks to set him up for success. And they're really the only team in Europe that consistently can play these comps and stay even in the game, and even sometimes get leads in situations where you wouldn't expect to them. And that kind of leaves us with a single question, which is, what's next? Will we see funnel Tristana? Will it be funnel Azir? Funnel Rammus? Give me Funnel Rammus G2. I'll call you the best team in Europe. It will be a terrible decision, but I'll love you for it anyway. The next team I want to talk about is Vitality. All about the early game. We've learned this time and time again, but it's even more important now, and really showing that they're not afraid to go toe-to-toe with Unicorns of Love in the mid lane. You think it would be their strength, but Vitality turned it against them, brought it bot lane where necessary, and it's really starting to look like a well-oiled machine. Also, Jizuke is back, which I absolutely love, dishing out dunks to the entire Unicorns of Love lineup. You can call Vitality a one-trick pony, but when the trick is winning games of League of Legends, it's a pretty damn good trick when you're playing in the EU LCS. Now, the last team, a bit of a sad story starting out. And after 2 weeks of losing, it did not really look like Splyce was ever going to find a win, but they did show that they can take it when it matters, going up against H2K. Everything did come together. It wasn't the cleanest, it wasn't perfect, but we saw more activity from Cersei. They did turn it around in the end. They showed up where they needed to, but the question remains. They're facing a tougher challenge today in Roccat, and European fans are praying that they can get it together before Rift Rivals. A 2-0 week might give them just a bit of hope, but personally, I'd rather not dress up as a cheerleader, so I'm going to be rooting for Roccat today.
So for anyone who is out of the loop in our EU LCS podcast, Euphoria, hosted by Drakos, there's always a lot of bets going on, and this week the guest was Oduwamne, and basically the case is if Roccat managed to beat Splyce, Oduwamne has to dress up in a cheerleader outfit, make a cheer for Drakos, and do a cartwheel, and wear makeup, and I don't know, all kinds of things.
Basically everything
kind of one of those do-it-you-won't situations where it just kept escalating. There was a backflip at one point, which I think Oduwamne might already be able to backflip and was trying to bait me. I don't really know, but yeah, it got a little out of hand. So, Roccat, let's go.
And you can check out that episode on YouTube, on SoundCloud, and on iTunes. There we go. Well, Splyce, as I said, is one of our teams for Rift Rivals together with G2 and Fnatic. And since we are starting to get warmed up for that event that's taking place next week and the NA versus EU battle, we took to Twitter to ask for your memes, your hot takes, anything you might want to tell us about the NA versus EU rivalry. Now, given I send out the tweets, so it might be pretty European biased, but let's see. Great.
I mean, it's the EU LCS. If there's any NA LCS bias tweets in here, I'm going to be real sad.
There we go. Successful international events by North American League of Legends teams. Sorry, no results found. It is a bit unfair. We do remember IEM.
NA has a world championship, Drakos.
IEM has a world championship.
Europe has a world championship.
The question
they have
is,
the real
is
one.
Season 1 Worlds worth more than IEM World Championship? What is the actual weight value for those two international events?
Yes, because Season 1 was an actual world championship, and Katowice was just called a world championship.
Yeah, it was still important. Also, CLG at the Mid-Season Invitational in Shanghai, which was 2015 or 16, I believe. They did really well. They got all the way to the finals, and they won Rift Rivals. So I know we want to be pretty EU biased, but NA has shown things on the international stage.
What is it? Who are you?
Wait, why are you playing the advocate for NA right now?
NA, we'll go get Dash,
team
girl.
Like Fnatic tiebreaker.
Thank you. Let's just talk trash.
All right.
Screw you, NA. We're way better.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All the
As
niceties
two
are out of the window. Let's take a look at the next one. At Tom1lol sent in this classic, and this brings us back. So for people who have not, followed professional League of Legends for that long, this is a mix-up of an old-school team called Moscow 5, later Gambit, with some absolute legends like Alex Ish, like Diamond Prox, like Darien, and they were just winning everything, especially versus NA teams, but also notably versus Korean teams.
This is the classic era of memes where you would just get into MS Paint and just clip out a face and just copy-paste it over and over again. This is the unrefined days of esports and memes. This is evergreen, for sure.
And a bit of a shout-out possibly for Soaz, who's still around and still crushing it, and he was also
I still use that facial expression whenever I have to make a Photoshop including Soaz. That is also a classic.
Where's Darien? We need Darien back in here.
Yeah,
those are some good times.
Indeed. Let's look at the next one from @Fionissas. What did he have to say?
What's it gonna be?
Oh my God!
EU Legends Rift Rivals 2017.
I spammed retweet on this bad boy. This is my favorite one. I love. Okay, so the best part about Rift Rivals every year is that people get progressively more petty the closer you get to this tournament, and just abandon all supporting evidence for any argument. They just get more and more flamey, and like. I actually love it. It's super toxic, definitely mega toxic. Yeah. But this kind of stuff just totally does.
I mean, if there's any time a tournament that it's suited for to get these reactions, it is Rift Rivals. However, serious implications, obviously. Last year we saw Fnatic, who really had to regroup after Rift Rivals, and that developed their style within EU. So it is definitely important, and I'm looking forward to the games.
NA's hopes flying away, just like the butterfly in the picture, man.
I mean, I can say that, but you're literally a traitor.
I mean, I'm here now.
Traders. I mean, we've come
over to the light,
In hindsight,
Sjokz.
when we planned talking about memes, maybe we shouldn't have put two North Americans on the desk.
Yeah.
Sorry, we sold you out, boys.
Yeah. All right, let's continue because we've talked a lot about the top teams because that's actually relatively easy because they're doing well and you can get to a lot of positive examples. But I want to take a look at the bottom half of the table and look at potential dark horses in the EU LCS. Because if we cast back our mind to spring, everything was extremely close until the last match day, and we weren't even sure who was going to make playoffs. So I want to hear from you guys who you think out of the bottom half of the table really has a shot at making it to playoffs or higher.
Right, so for me, my dark horse was Roccat, because I think coming into the split, people didn't expect them to be sitting at 4th place already, and it's really just been all on the back of this guy, Memento. You heard Perks last night on PGL say, this guy's hard smurfing in the LCS right now, and combined with the playmaking potential of Norscarin, this is a fun team to watch and a scary team to face off.
Personally, I love that fun team to watch counts as a qualifier for Dark Horse. But they are an excellent team to watch. They've been getting progressively better. But I think it's a little bit of a cop-out, Ender, when they're tied for 4th right now. Just going to say it. I'm going to go with Unicorns of Love, who will stay away from the Giant Splice H2K area because I'm not that much faith here. But Unicorns of Love getting progressively better, starting to look like a more cohesive team. Yes, they're pretty much always playing around mid lane, but they know how to do it really well, and they know that that's how they win. And really, I can't fault the team for seeing what they need to do and executing on it. Yes, consistency isn't 100% there, but as they get better, as we get further in the split, I do have high hopes for Unicorns.
Yeah, and speaking of playmaking, Totoro on that pike, I just love to watch that.
Absolutely. I would say it's probably fine that you're not extremely consistent because they're at 2 and 3 and 3 and 2 respectively, so they're in relatively good positions. My question is, where's Schalke in this conversation? Do they not qualify as a dark horse because they have these veterans on the roster, but they haven't made playoffs last split, so where do you see them right now?
They just don't look that good, Sjokz. I mean, these other teams have had really good moments, and I think Schalke have had a few, but I've seen way too much of Amazing's early game not having that super high impact that I know we can have.
And it's just disappointing because we see this team play really like one clean game probably every 3 weeks is what we saw in spring, and it's starting to be the same trend where we know they can be really good, where they can show up and be this strong macro team with strong individual players, and then every other game after that, until the next good game, it's like, okay, this player isn't performing, this strategy isn't working out, this draft fell apart, and there's just really no semblance of consistency. So yes, you could call them a dark horse, but there really wouldn't be a lot to support them going any further until you see any semblance of that consistency.
I mean, Amazing just came into that roster, of course, this split, so we'll see how that evolves. Maybe he can get his hands on Nocturne and make some plays. And speaking of the Eternal Nightmare, here's Vedius for his Nocturne breakdown.
Hi, Vedius, your resident Nocturne one-trick, here to talk to you about what has become a pretty prevalent jungler in the current meta. At an 80.6% pick and ban rate in all major regions, Nocturne is the 2nd most contested jungler across the globe. So why is that? Well, throughout this year, he has had consistent buffs. The first one being to his ultimate. The duration got extended from 4 seconds to 6 seconds, and that means that there is a lot of darkness for a very long time. This makes it very difficult for the opposition to react to plays whenever it comes down, and it usually guarantees you a kill every time you pop that paranoia. On top of that, we also saw buffs to his Q. At level 9, that Q gives you the equivalent AD of a BF sword and 2 long swords. That's a lot of damage without even any items. This gives him a lot of trading power, and it gives him just a lot of additional damage. On top of that, we saw a couple of changes to runes. You've probably noticed that a lot of pro junglers have been running lethal tempo. This combines very nicely with the attack speed that he passively gets from his W, and it means that he passes the attack speed cap. So if you have a lot of attack speed and you get a lot of damage without even building any items, you can see how when he's hacking and slashing away at you, it's going to really hurt. With all of this in mind, he has a very strong ability to skirmish and duel in the early game. He has a very strong ability to gank thanks to his ultimate, and he offers a huge amount of teamfight value because of the darkness and all the effectiveness that he can have. But that kind of concludes it for why junglers are so prevalent in the meta. But with that out of the way, we got to talk about Nocturne in the mid lane. My montage is coming out tomorrow, but it's... This is the best bit.
Security!
The best bit.
Jungle Nocturne is all we needed to hear. We're so tired of hearing about Nocturne mid.
Bye, Vedius.
There we go. Thank you very much,
Thanks
Vedius.
for the picks to watch, voice.
Great breakdown, though, of Nocturne jungle, and this is why we have seen him much, much more in the EU LCS, and two teams that might pull it out. We just talked about them, Amazing and Sjokz. They are up versus Vitality today, and that is our marquee matchup of the day. Very important one with the eye on the race in the standings, the race for the top 6, because if Sjokz win, they make up one spot in the standings on Vitality. However, Vitality yesterday, they made up their 0-2 week. They absolutely crushed the Unicorns of Love, so they'll be feeling the momentum.
Exactly. For Vitality, I said yesterday this was the most important week of the split for them because they were just coming off of that 0-2 performance in week 2. And they destroyed in their match, absolutely blew UOL out of the water, and now they're going to be able to ride that momentum for a successful win, I think.
And hey, I talked about it earlier, Jizuke starting to play better again is a huge boon for Vitality for this lineup as a whole. I want to see them keep the momentum, despite the fact that the team in the past has said, hey, we're not emotional players. When they start winning, they usually keep winning, so that is a good place for them to be.
Now, we'll look at that matchup a bit more in detail in just a second, but first, here's what Upset said before his rematch against Attila.
This game is so team dependent, very rarely about the individual matchup where it's like 1v1 outplays. A lot of people might seem humble to the outside, but inside they're still like really cocky, and talking like an individual player for me doesn't make too much sense. I think Attila definitely tries to have mind games on people and talk them for fun and stuff.
We even gave him Kalista, you know, I wanted a challenge, you know, Kalista is permaban. I'm like, give him Kalista, I don't care, they won't let me Kalista. They give him Kalista, like he doesn't do anything, I just out-rotate him, I out-micro him.
Just know that you shouldn't really behave like this if you want to be liked by a lot of fans, or if you don't want to get a lot of hate if you lose.
Love it, two very different players. Upset usually a bit soft-spoken, and Attila is really one of those guys who thrives on the talk, and he doesn't care if he then loses and people send him mean tweets, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's all Vitality, right? You got Gilius, the king of Twitter hate himself. He's spamming out all the BM, and Attila's just following in that footstep.
I mean, love him or hate him, you want to watch, right? When someone talks that much, you're either on their side and you want to see him smash, or you want to see them get smashed. So it is always interesting whenever you see Vitality come in. And the rivalry here that's kind of been growing between Attila and Upset over the course of their time in the LCS is one that's just so interesting to me, because for both of them, they haven't been the center of attention on their team. Upset, he's fallen down a lot. Attila, on the other hand, has started to rise a little bit more, so things are changing.
Things are changing when you look at how Vitality beat the Unicorns of Love yesterday and look at Sjokz and Nulfir's game, respectively. Where does Sjokz have to focus their attention to do well here in this matchup?
I think it comes down to shutting down Jizuke in the mid lane. In a lot of
the age-old story.
Yeah, the age-old story, of course. I mean, it's just, it's never going to go away, because yesterday we saw finally Vitality enabling him and playing around him and propping him up for success. And I think there's still room to abuse that if Sjokz play proactively around it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to see Amazing on an early game jungler. Camille has been really his only successful pick, I would argue, across his games. Even the games that they've lost, when he's played it, he's been active. So seeing those elements come together where Sjokz set themselves up to shut this guy down and make sure that they can take control of the game early on is really crucial for them to come out and win.
We'll have our eyes on that matchup. That's the second game of the day, Vitality versus Sjokz. We're going to kick everything off with the Misfits once again versus H2K once again, because every team plays every day, Sjokz. That's just the way it goes. And Giant versus Fnatic. Now, I feel like when I look at this, that it's very possible that it's kind of a blowout in each of these games. Which one do you think could break the mold? Could G2 versus UOL be more competitive?
I'm going to say Vitality versus Sjokz could be competitive, because when we talked about Sjokz earlier, we did mention that every once in a while they play a really good game. They play a really good game, and that's always what builds people's hope up. I don't know if it's going to be this one, but there's potential there. Splyce versus Roccat is also debatable. What form are Splyce in right now? That's the kind of the big question mark.
There's still the big underdogs coming into that match, but this is our third team going to Rift Rivals, so even if you don't expect them to win that, you have to be watching to see what they're going to do against NA.
They're our Phoenix One.
But yeah, sure. We need to find that Mike Young. Xerxes needs to be that Mike Young. That's all I'm saying. And we're only saying this because we're really scared. Because we really would like to win.
I love how we're like, oh, memes and Rift Rivals, yeah, NA won, but you know, we're not scared. Now we're actually really
scared. This tournament doesn't mean anything, and then we're gonna, if we win it, we'll be like, yeah, you know, Rift Rivals, really important international victory under our belt.
We've still got G2 and Fnatic though, so
true.
we're all right.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Very looking forward to all of the matchups. Let's also take a look at the predictions, as this is an ongoing battle. Right now, Vedius is still leading in the race for Superior Analyst. His votes are not on here, but you can always see on Twitter where everyone has put his votes on LoL Esports. And then we see, where's the difference? Oh, I voted for Sjokz over Vitality.
I think you got a story to tell us. What's going on here, Sjokz?
Well, I want to take some calculated risks that are not too wacky, and Sjokz has been inconsistent, so they lost yesterday. That means that they will win today. So
that being said,
that's all.
I'm about to have a 10-0 week, so that's all I'm trying to say.
Well, we have the same predictions, so I don't want to argue with you, but I also don't want to support you being cocky. So maybe can I make a last-minute change just to try to shut you down?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No, I can't.
Let's see. I do think that the consensus on Roccat beating Splyce is quite interesting, because Splyce got their victory yesterday, and it's not like that's, you know, you would say that is such a convincing vote for Roccat, but you guys seem absolutely
I mean, they're playing against H2K, right? So while it is nice, Splyce did pick up a victory, you still can't be like, oh, Splyce is back, even though they did look good in that match.
It's true. I think we haven't seen Splyce's final level yet. I think there's still a lot of members who are playing a little bit inconsistently. Xerxes especially hasn't been the most active jungler, and I think that's something that the team has really needed to succeed, that just hasn't been there. But Roccat feel like they've got everything that they need to be a top team, and it's just about putting it to use.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Misfits will be up on the plate for our very first game of the day, and there we have Maxlor in the jungle, and he's hoping to get his hands on his now famous Talia.
That's why I just played Talia now. You know, I've been waiting a whole year to play this champion, right? A whole year. Have you seen my DPM? It's crazy. This champion's so OP.
Let's see what happens around mid lane. Maxlor is here. That's the wrong way.
The wrong way. Oh, Maxlor.
Guys, do not make fun of him.
Yeah. That was for, Talia wasn't banned today because I did that. No joke. You think I'll miss a W on purpose? Come on, bro.
Maxlor, I hope he gets his hands on the Talia.
Yeah, but I honestly feel like it's been rude. We've been ignoring Jarge this whole time. Jarge, what do you think?
What the? Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Maxlor is just...
Wait, what?
Oh, hey, you
have you been there the whole time?
Yeah, of course. You didn't hear my great analysis earlier on?
No.
No?
No, we didn't. But glad you joined us just in time, because you're actually a huge fan of Maxlor and what he's been doing. What exactly does he bring to these Misfits
I am a huge fan of Maxlor, and for me, what's really impressive about him is just he's the full package, right? I mean, he does everything. He's an engager. He focuses on his lanes. He doesn't fall behind too much in farm. And what's really good about me is just the way he works with his teammates, especially Mickey X.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up Mickey X, because for me, he's really stepped it up here in the early game. Whether it's just dominating 2 versus 2 with Hansam in the bot lane, or pulling out picks like the Gragas and really having an impact when it comes to these big mid-game scraps.
And in the context of Misfits, that is very important. We heard from Mickey X that he said, well, I really need to work on my communication. I need to get more aligned with my team in that regard. And I think if you see that his synergy with Maxlor is at a high level now, that means that there must be improvements in that thing.
Sure. I mean, for me, what's most impressive about all of Misfits really is just their flexibility, the way they can do multiple things inside the same kind of core shell that they're building every comp around. And for me, Maxlor is a pinnacle of that. He does the mages, he does the tanks, he does the, the Camille kind of squishy Trinity Force junglers. He's just a full package player.
Do you think that in the meta and the fact that some teams are taking the crazy route and they also often have to play against that, the fact that they play standard and they do it so well is a testament to how good they are?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, standard is the hardest strategy to prepare for, right? I mean, you look at the G2 funnel strategy, it's very clear, it's very obvious what it's going to do. We saw your breakdown yesterday about what a funnel comp is, and I thought that was very, very accurate in terms of, what is this team trying to do? You look at a team like a Bruiser comp, it's kind of, again, very obvious what it's going to do. For an AD carry composition, it's this has been played for 8 years. It could do anything. Anything we've seen in the last 8 years, it can be running an AD carry comp. For me, this is what makes Misfits so tough to beat.
And stepping away from just how they play in game, if you look at the bigger Misfits story, this is a team that in 2017 said, we have a 1-year plan, and we had some question marks, but in the end, they made it to Worlds. They almost beat SKT, and then they come back here. They, of course, lose some important members and have to reset entirely.
Exactly, and that's a huge change to have to go through with a team when you're semifinals at Worlds. All of a sudden, you lose your star mid laner, your support goes to Korea. Well, with Power and Evil and Ignore out of the question, we had Sjokz and Mickey X, and I think especially with Sjokz in the mid lane, Spring Split was a bit of a disappointment, but that is completely out the window now. These are two players that have stepped it up so much here in the Summer Split, and that's been the big difference.
Yeah, but it's not over yet. They've still got to do the rest of the season, and we saw in the Spring Split, they didn't have the best record against the lower tier teams, and they're playing against the last place team today. So for me, this is an absolute must-win. If HJK looked like anything other than a speed bump, that's an embarrassing performance from Misfits for me.
That is a fantastic point. The reason why Misfits fell out of playoffs is in part because they weren't able to beat those lower placed teams, and for now that is exactly what H2K is. So I'd love to know from H2K's coach Veteran how they're going to approach this game.
Hey guys, I'm joined here by H2K's coach Veteran ahead of their match against Misfits. Now, Veteran, your team is off to a bit of a rough start, 0-5 in the split. What is going on with H2K at the moment? What are the big problems that you're seeing?
Okay, so right now, within the scrims, you're actually able to execute a lot of the compositions that we are pulling off on stage. So there's a lot of indecisiveness right now. It's that kind of age-old adage that, you know, we're like a really good scrim team, but then there's mental nerves or whatever is going on stage in that regard. We do know the instances, and we are really easily able to identify the instances in which we should be executing our composition on our win conditions, but right now that's not really transpiring. So a lot of things that have to change, I guess, are more confidence building, and we just have to be a lot more confident specifically on the composition we're doing all week. What we've been doing all week should work, and we just need to make sure that we execute on it. Doing something is better than doing nothing. We don't want to be that team that that is just not doing anything for ages and then slowly bleeding out. We don't want to be that team, at least not again. And yeah, we're 0-5 right now. I'm not personally going to panic until we're 0-8, because then I'm in unknown territory. But we can be minimum 1-7, and I'm still kind of confident that we can make it to playoffs and do what we were doing before.
All right, so you have a very tough opponent as well here, Misfits, coming up today out of the opposite scoreline with the 5-0. Yeah. How do you guys make this a 1-5 record to end the week?
Well, we just have to actually execute on whatever composition it is we end up with today. I'll make sure it's something that we've practiced the whole week, something that we've had success with the whole week, and then it's down to the players and their confidence to execute it properly.
All right, thank you very much, Veteran. Best of luck for your matchup.
Cheers.
All right, we're going to head it back off to the analysts.
Lovely to hear from Veteran. Jarge, you wanted to get in and comment on what he said. What struck you as the most interesting part?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel for the guy. I mean, I've been on losing teams before, and I know what it feels like to kind of come in every week and be like, okay, guys, we know what we need to be working on this week. You know, we've got to be doing on this. Like, sometimes it's stage nerves. Sometimes it's just, oh, you know, this guy made one mistake that, you know, the team was really good at capitalizing on. And just the nature of League of Legends is a snowball-based game. And if you fall behind, the enemy team does inherently have an advantage, and you're not on that even keel again. So I kind of just, I feel for him. And I think, you know, looking at his spring performance, you know, the team, I think that if they do get that one win, I really do think they can turn it around. But, you know, it's getting out of that hole that's really tough.
That's a double-edged sword to me, the way he said, well, I'm in unknown territory if we get past 0-8, because that's where they turned it around in spring and then miraculously made it all the way to playoffs. However, it's a bit dangerous because you know that it's going to be incredibly competitive getting there. So they rather turn it around right now. So if H2K are to do it, how do they beat Misfits today?
Well, we're going to need some win conditions on the screen, because that's what we were talking about yesterday before this match. You know, last night we came off of that loss against Splice and tried to think of that. And I think for you specifically, you were looking at the jungle, Jarge.
Yeah, for me, what's really important is that Sjokz needs to gank. He needs to get his lanes ahead. He's really got to be putting down the pressure in the early game. And honestly, like, if I was going to look anywhere, I would want to look at the solo lanes, mid and top.
Yeah, I think for Sjokz, it's about enabling the top laner. SmittyJ has tried to pull out a lot of these carry-style champions, but he hasn't gotten the support from his jungler needed to build that advantage. If he can win in a 1v1 in a side lane, that is a very powerful tool to be able to use here, so he can just sort of go wild on his own and try to carry the game.
Well, let me ask you something. If SmittyJ is the guy that should be enabled, but Sheriff is the guy who carried them to playoffs, why is that a different approach then? Should they then not just send everyone bottom?
Well, it's really the way they're drafting. They're already putting SmittyJ on like the Fiora and the Jax, all these kind of split push picks. So if this is the strategy that they're coming in with, and this is the strategy that they're committing to, then for me, it's just about making it work. And so far, they've not really given much support to SmittyJ on these picks. And if they are going to make it work, that's just how they've got to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And as we say for Misfits, how Maxlor is so important for that team, how he has 100% first blood percentage, how he literally is in every lane constantly. Sjokz is just the complete opposite. A jungle proximity of 39% was his 9th for all junglers. Means that we just want to see something out of him. And maybe if that improves just a little bit, he'll be able to get a lane going.
I mean, and you heard Veteran saying, he said he didn't want to have a team that doesn't do anything. Sjokz so far hasn't been doing much to help out his team to get them to a point where they can succeed. So that is the biggest change for them. If they're going to make something happen, it's Sjokz pressing R on Nocturne and ganking lanes early.
Yeah, at least pressing R. We'll see where it goes. So for Misfits, they have to win this game. You said it, Jarge. It can be, if it's anything more than a speed bump, that is a disappointment. How far are your, or how high are your hopes for the Misfits this split?
For the Misfits, I think if they don't, given their current performance, if they don't get a bye going into playoffs, I think they'd be disappointed. For me, I think
it should be more. The way they're playing now, this team has to be looking at the cup.
Yeah, they want to be winning the cup because they don't have much championship points from last split. They don't want to have to, you know, degrade themselves with the gauntlet. They want to be first seed coming out of Europe.
I think they should have their eyes firmly on that final. And HUK, they need to have their eyes firmly on the playoffs. And to do that, they need to start winning, and they need to start winning right now. Unfortunately for them, it is versus those Misfits who are currently at 5-0. We'll find out where the teams go. Picks and bans are ready. Let's go over to our casters and get into the game.
Oh, it's Vedi time. Let's go.
Let's go. Thank you, Sjokz, and good afternoon. I'm